Only older individuals should view this video. This phrase might seem off-putting to some, but it makes perfect sense for those who have lived through decades and carry the scars of many loves and heartaches. The story I'm about to share is of an older man who, in search of a new purpose in life, began dating a woman much younger than himself. He was captivated by her enthusiasm and intelligence. She was 20 years younger, full of life, and possessed a beauty he thought he would never see again. He did not suspect that this radiance hid a shadow that only he would notice over time. He immediately understood that this relationship would be challenging. Friends reacted, young people reprimanded him, and he had his own reservations, but at 70 years old his heart still beat strongly, and he wanted to prove it to himself. Even though he managed to conquer and keep a young woman, his hesitation turned into obsession. He wanted to give everything as if everything was almost perfect, the last love story of his life. She gave him a new lease on life, but the price to pay was enormous, and he only realized it later. At first, everything was almost perfect. She showered him with kind words, praise, and compassion. He felt strong and virile, rediscovering a youth he thought was long gone. She knew exactly how to seduce him, and he succumbed to each of her gazes and movements. He went to great lengths to satisfy her, treating her as if she were royalty. But what he did not realize was that she began to impose minor demands, always with that air of superiority that he mistook for pure attraction. The changes in her behavior became more and more evident over time. Subtle humiliations disguised his changes in her behavior. Comments began to appear. She told him he should take better care of himself, because people his age should not have such physical limitations. At first he tried to laugh, believing it was a joke, but the frequency increased and the laughter began to fade. She never stopped telling him he was too old for her. The final straw was when she focused her criticisms on his performance in bed. He, who had always believed he could bring affection and emotional satisfaction, found himself facing harsh and pointed criticisms. She asserted that he was slow, predictable, and incapable of satisfying her like a younger man. Would he tried to argue to convince her that age does not limit a person's ability to make others happy. But her comments were too cutting to be ignored. He then remembered. Would he try to argue the power he exercised, or rather his method? He assured her that despite his lack of youthful strength, he knew how to delight her in a special, unique way through his devotion and care. He said it with a passion and confidence that few younger men could match. But instead of honoring him, she mocked what she considered a desperate attempt by an old man to be useful. This mockery tore his heart apart. He felt humiliated, but tried to convince himself that it was a test of patience and resilience. He hoped that by being understanding, she would eventually see his value and devotion. However, each of these statements pushed him to devalue himself further, and he began to perceive himself as unimportant and of little value in the eyes of a young woman. For anyone witnessing this, he made a decision story. It may seem simple to condemn his decision to stay, yet anyone who has lived a long time understands that love, especially in its most terrible form, can take us hostage and force us to accept things we would never have tolerated. Otherwise, he was no longer just bound by the youth of the young woman, but also by the idea that he could prove himself to someone who seemed unable to see beyond his age. One night, following a dispute that made him feel even smaller, he made a decision. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a 70-year-old man with wrinkles of old age on his face and the weight of experience in his eyes. He recognized that self-love must speak louder, because he could not live in the shadow of approval from someone who would never accept him for who he was. He faced her calmly, then decided to face her calmly. He indicated that he was ready to end the relationship because no matter how much he loved her, he could not continue to be humiliated. She looked at him in astonishment, as if she did not expect him to have the courage to do it. Yet at that moment he regained some of the dignity he had lost with each of her remarks. The conversation was unpleasant but liberating. He felt like he was finally acting his age. Not in the sense of fragility, but in the sense of wisdom. He remembered all the years he had lived, the experiences he had, and the value he still possessed no matter how many wrinkles he had, or his age upon leaving. After leaving her house, he felt a sense of relaxation he had not known for months. He recognized that it is sometimes vital to accept that not everyone will understand the value we, and by submitting to humiliation he had lost himself. Yet by freeing himself he regained not only his self-esteem, but also the tranquility of a love that only he could offer. The following days were difficult to live through. Loneliness returned, but it was a clean, dignified loneliness without the burden of having to prove something to anyone. He realized that even without her he remained a man of value, someone who embodied the pure spirit of what love is. This self-love, a few months later, allowed him to move forward. This event taught him that not all young people deserve to sacrifice their dignity, and that true love is one that accepts, respects, and cherishes all people regardless of their physical abilities or age. A few months later, he discovered new joys in life. He reconnected with old acquaintances, visited places he had always wanted to see, and rediscovered activities he had abandoned. He recognized that his value did not depend on the approval of a younger woman, but rather on the peace he found in looking. He had abandoned at himself. Each wrinkle on his face tells a story, and each gray hair marks a memory. He understood that aging brings the wisdom to know what is truly important. He no longer needed to sacrifice himself to satisfy others. Instead, he became more interested in his own satisfaction. This anecdote serves as a reminder to other older people who have the same doubts. The desire for love is understandable, but it should never come at the expense of inner serenity. Lessons are learned over time, and only those who have lived a long time understand the importance of preserving their dignity in the face of the deceptive promises of youth. And hindsight in hindsight. He realized that this relationship had been a precious learning opportunity. It was a lesson in acceptance and the importance of putting one's own principles first. No matter the criticism, he learned that to be loved, he first had to love himself completely, with all his flaws and strengths. For him, ending the relationship meant reclaiming his identity. Many see in this story an example of the importance of self-love. Even when everything around seems to conspire against our confidence, only the value of dignity. Older people should see this film because they understand the value of dignity. He discovered that a man's value is determined by his integrity in the face of adversity, not by his age, and it is this integrity that turns every wrinkle into a symbol of wisdom. Based on this story, I would like to propose 5 lessons for older people who have relationship problems. The first lesson is that as tempting as it may be to recreate the glory of youth with someone younger, it is essential to keep your feet on the ground and not get lost in the first lesson. The illusion many people like the character end up devoting their time and energy to someone who does not truly appreciate them. The desire to prove that one still has vigor and capabilities can become a trap, forcing us to accept humiliations that we would never have tolerated at other stages of life. Love should not be a testing ground, but rather an environment of respect and mutual acceptance. The second lesson. The second lesson story teaches us is the value of self-love. By accepting costly comments about his performance in age, he felt like he was giving up a part of himself. He thought that tolerating her criticisms in the name of love was a noble act, but in reality he was sacrificing his dignity. Loving oneself is a commitment that must precede any relationship, because forgetting one's own value is to expose oneself to the contempt of others. Recognizing that we deserve respect and affection is the foundation of any healthy relationship. The third lesson is to have the courage to free oneself and accept loneliness as a kind of peace, even if it is only temporary. When he decided to end this relationship, it was more than just a breakup, it was a rehabilitation for himself. He chose the most difficult, but the third lesson, also the most valuable path. Choosing to be alone rather than continuing to be humiliated is a sign of strength. Sometimes loneliness is a place of restructuring self-esteem, and not a punishment. In truth, he gave himself the opportunity to regain his inner calm that no one could take away from him. The fourth lesson is that with age our experiences and memories become true treasures, and those who do not recognize this only lock themselves into superficiality, wrinkles, gray hair. The fourth lesson, sign of time, tells a story and offers a learning opportunity. He understood that he did not need to model himself after an image of pristine youth, because what he had was much deeper. Those who seek the superficial will never appreciate the value of bring, especially those who only see the surface here recognize the cumulated wisdom. Therefore, it is useless to try to please someone who does not understand who we are. The fifth lesson is that being attentive to a partner's needs, particularly physical closeness, is the fifth lesson show of affection. He thought that even if he no longer had the physical vigor of his youth, he could express his devotion and desire through other means. This demonstration of affection and devotion often shows a man willing to put his partner's needs before his own pride. However, respect must be mutual offering. A certain closeness is a sign of interest, but should not be interpreted as an obligation or a cause for embarrassment. In this example, he learned that no matter how hard he tried to please her, his efforts must be recognized. The lesson he draws from this is that true closeness requires respect and consideration, not judgments or criticisms. If you were touched by the story and think these teachings can help others, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Share this message with others who might need to reflect on the value of dignity and self-love. The greatest life lessons come from the stories of people who have lived long enough to understand what is truly important.